Hello once again, and welcome to the Helps Ministry from the Knights Templar Church. I'm Reverend Steve Criscole. Now, today's video is all about walking with God, and I want to explore what it means to be walking with God. Excuse me. So to do that, I'm going to use a parallel picture. So here's our parallel. Let's just imagine you're a teenager and you went to a really strict school. You know, you would notice there's quite a few things that make that school stand out. Firstly, it might be the uniform. Yeah, everyone's the same. You know, the girls wear uniform for girls, skirts, and the boys wear pants, this is the usual thing. They're all the same colour, the uniforms. There are strict rules about how that uniform is to be worn. It's ties fastened, shirt tucked in, clean uniform, etc., etc. You clean your shoes and so on, all of that. The idea being that you're meant to take pride in your uniform, because what it does is it denotes you as a student of that particular school, doesn't it? You're a representative of that school when you're out and about, so on your way to school, going from, and so on like that. Now, this imaginary school, it follows what you might call natural law, in that it recognises only male and females, boys and girls, where, you know, the girls are required to wear skirts and no trousers. There are no 72 or 153, whatever it is, different genders. There's literally boys and girls, and everybody understands that. The boys wear long trousers, and there's no confusion whatsoever about who is male and who is female. Now, in our imaginary school, then, the next thing that might stand out are the rules of the school. They're fair. They're equally enforced. No exceptions for misdemeanors. Doesn't matter who it is that's done such and such a thing. Just because you may be a prefect doesn't mean if you've done something wrong, you get the same punishment as somebody else. Punishments are swift, and the headmaster or the headmistress alone being the one that administers punishments. There are obviously things like detention, which they can, pass on to other teachers and so on. That's Now, behaviour in the corridors. There's something else. Orderly, unchaotic, and the staff are monitoring it all whenever in between lessons. The teachers themselves are strictly monitored to make sure that they teach only their designated subjects. No foreign ideologies are allowed to creep in. The lessons, they encourage the children to speak freely, ask questions, think for themselves, while learning, you know, they have a curriculum to learn, but they can still think for themselves. Now, okay, so that's as far as that parallel goes. You might be wondering how this imaginary school compares as a kind of parallel to our Christian walk with God. Well, you know, we could go on with parallels all day, but there are some schools actually who do operate like this, but they are very, very few and far between, but they do exist. And the problem is that society tends to regard them as being, well, with some ridicule, let's put it that way. Now, so we've talked about the school uniform. What about us Christians and our walk with God? Do we have a Christian uniform? I think you probably find that 99.9% of Christians don't have a uniform, but okay, or do they? Or some do. What I'm wearing today is a tropical type uniform because I'm living in a Far Eastern country. However, you have things called nuns, monks. You have lots of Catholic priests and Protestant priests. They all wear a specific type of clothing, don't they? It's a uniform. It denotes who they are in terms of being a Christian in that sense. I'm being a presbyter, probably. Now, I don't particularly want any special recognition because I wear a uniform. But, being immediately recognized as a man of God, it's helpful to other people because maybe they need some spiritual guidance. And they may not know you personally, but if they see the uniform, they can at least approach you if that's what they want to do. Now, look, the parallel here isn't just about clothing, okay? I hope you get that. It's mostly about uniformity. There's probably a secondary point about that, being modestly dressed, and being aware of maintaining a modest appearance, no matter where we are, whatever gender we are, whichever sex we are, and depending on the circumstances. But if we concentrate on the main point about uniformity, then that should speak to us about how we all present ourselves to the world. Now, I'm talking about our Christian beliefs, of course. That's uniformity of Christian doctrine, but also the way in which we actually conduct ourselves with each other and with the general public. And these things should be closely linked. So let's put it this way. It's our understanding of God's requirements of us as Christians which should feed through to how we conduct ourselves in the world. So if the children leave our imaginary school at 4 p.m, 4 in the afternoon, as I used to do as a kid, and start causing trouble in the street, which I didn't do, I'm pleased to say, well, then their uniform identifies their school. And passers-by will lower their respect for that school, not so much the kids individually. The last time I was at high school, the school I went to, I moved from another part of the country. So I spent my fifth year, the last and part of the fourth year, in this school. I won't say the name, but it's actually been demolished now. But anyway, and it was an awful school, and there were fights out in the surrounding areas, and it had a terrible reputation. So glad I went. Thanks, Mum and Dad. Anyway, our behaviour as Christians reflects on our church and the faith as a whole, right? Okay, so that's kind of a parallel that I've drawn there. Okay, now another one might not seem quite so important at first glance, but it's the one about natural law I mentioned in my initial story about this imaginary school, meaning that girls are female and boys are male, and they dress appropriately according to their gender, and there is no difference between the words sex and gender in that sense. Okay, but there's a wider point to be made here, and that is that natural law equals God's law, or at least part of it. Now, as Christians, we should believe the scriptures. We see in Genesis that God created the earth, the plants, and all living things. There's a set standard in creation that designates male and female through every creature, perhaps with the exception of earthworms, which are, what's the word? I can't remember the word, but anyway, they self-procreate. I remember that from my biology class very vaguely when I was a kid. Now, look, if we're intending to develop a right way of living and a life that pleases God, then we've got to do so in line with the world that he created. So God has made it very clear in Scripture about what is abhorrent to him as regards our sexual activities, for example. So there can be no room for our own preferences in those areas. Now, in our school parallel, well, we can immediately see who the girls are and who the boys are. Things like changes of clothing for sports follow the same principle. If the girls want to play soccer, there's nothing wrong with that, okay, then they can wear the same uniform as boys. But, only playing football against another girl team, which is only fair and right. So the football kit, it's quite a generic kit, isn't it? I'm talking about soccer, by the way, to our American friends. Okay, it's quite a generic kind of kit anyway, and I don't play the game. I have no idea if the girls, when they play football, are actually using a different shape of uniform. I don't know. but they look the same, pretty much. So really, that shouldn't cause any issues, should it? Now, I keep seeing, thanks to YouTube and its wonderful algorithm, I keep seeing occasionally these pictures that are thrown at you that show you women in young women in athletics who are wearing extremely revealing clothing, as opposed to, you know, because that's what they wear. I'm not advocating for that, okay, not in the slightest. I think that is I think that's sinful, personally. So care taken in how we dress is what I alluded to earlier on. See, there are parallels, aren't there, with the Christian walk. There are designated roles for men and for women in the Bible. But we've got to remember that they are simply roles that are largely based on an understanding of the natural function of women. And whether you like this idea or not, whether you're a feminist or not, I'm not really that bothered. But the function of women, primarily, given their, shall we say, internal organ structure and their, shall we say, difference of opinion, shall we say, to men in certain areas. Look, they're meant to be both companion to their husband and a childbearer, because they bear children. Does that mean that women, you know, can't be warriors, pilots or astronauts? Well, no, not really. I'm sorry, I don't really go for women in soldiers. I think that's a step too far, personally, but that's just my opinion. That's a choice essentially for each woman to make. But each choice comes with a set of consequences, doesn't it? It's a big topic. I'm not going to go into that, but it's enough to say that men and women are equal in the sight of God, but their general roles in life are usually different. And that is how God designed it. So it's only the ideas of man that has kind of skewed these roles, taking the idea that men and women are equal in all things as meaning that women can do all things that a man can do, which is, in the vast majority of cases, completely false. Trying to ignore the fact that women have a womb. Woman. Did you get that? What? Yeah. Well, if you forget that simple fact, it's just plain madness. How could you forget that a woman is meant to be, is a childbearer? Am I advocating that women shouldn't go out to work? No, of course not. I'm not saying that. But if they choose to have children, then their role should be, in my view, and in God's view, limited to that of mother and carer. Bring up your children. Don't give the person to a nanny and go and earn a load of money. Sounds easy when you say it quick. But that is the nature of women. It's probably the most important role that a woman can play. Being the CEO of a conglomerate is okay, I suppose, but in doing so, the price paid is that of a life with a family. And anybody who thinks that they can do that kind of job and have a successful family are deluded. So if you have decided to have children, then be there for them. It's the Christian way. You can only bring up your children if you're there. And if you're not there, how can you infuse them and educate them and help them and nurture them? When the kids are at school, go to work if you want. But always be there for your children, because they need you. Okay, so that was just one subject, isn't it? As Christians, then, we've got 10 commandments, which are the spoken law of God. And we're expected to follow them. We were talking about walking with God. Okay, so 10 rules to live by. That's it. This isn't what you might call, what would they have? I mean, used to have it in Woolworths, if you remember, a pick and mix, where you could pick and mix the candies that you bought, the sweets. It's not one of those. It's not, I'll have a bit of this and I'll have a bit of that and I'll stick those in a bag and I'll take them to the counter. No. 10 laws to live by. And that's what we're supposed to live by. Those 10 laws are there for the worship of God and for the protection of us as individuals. It's also the formulation of common law, another subject. Follow God's law, or, like it or not, you have committed a sin. If we go back to our school parallel I was talking about earlier, you saw how the school rules are required to be strictly followed by all. And any infractions are dealt with fairly and justly. The head manager of the school, head mistress, teacher, head mistress or headmaster, they implement those rules. And so it's right that he or she be the one to mete out any punishment. Now that can be delegated, like I said earlier on, but, well, essentially, loosely, the parallel to our story, excuse me, is that God is our head teacher, our headmaster. He's the boss, and he's the one who metes out the punishment, which you can clearly see if you read the Old Testament. He's fair. He gives lots of warnings. And most often he is merciful in his forgiving of wrongdoing. These are patterns that we see throughout the Old Testament. And we need to be aware that God is watching always. If we slip up and do or say something sinful, then God knows. And that's become a euphemism, isn't it? You hear when somebody says, well, do you know such and such a thing? It's like, God knows. But that's a blasphemy, all right? But the phrase is there, God knows. It could be a slip of the tongue, obviously, but it's become a well-known phrase. God knows. Well, we must realize that we do these things every single day. So, if we're sinning every day, which we are, even as if we're born-again Christians, we're still sinning every day, we've got to be sure to pray for forgiveness of those sins and do it every single day. Look, if you happen to be a Catholic and you go to a confessional once a flood, whenever you go, what are you doing? Are you going to God and asking him for forgiveness, or are you going to a man sitting on the other side of a screen and asking for his forgiveness? And this man is going to grant you forgiveness. Who made him God? Go to the source. God will not accept sin. We must be sinless if we are to be part of his kingdom. So, part of our walk with God is to stick to his laws. And knowing that we're not perfect, continually pray for forgiveness for what we do badly on a daily basis. So that's another parallel, isn't it, to our school scenario. What about lessons? What about God's lessons? Now, God's lessons come in various shapes and sizes, don't they? Mostly, it kind of depends on your circumstances, like which church you go to or whereabouts in the world you live, whatever the culture might be. But if we look back to our school parallel, again, that sort of provides its students with daily lessons, doesn't it? Yeah? And there are teachers for each subject. Now, this is kind of where the parallel doesn't really sort of fit in too well, but it has its limitations, obviously. But because we're Christians, we have real difficulties when it comes to learning about God and his kingdom. I warrant, if I was to ask randomly a member of church, just pick somebody, close my eyes, turn around 3 times and pick somebody in church and ask them to tell me how many books there are in the Bible, they probably wouldn't be able to tell me. The answer is 66, by the way. So, rather than spend, time looking at all the possibilities, I just want to look at what we Christians should be doing in principle. And I think it's fair to say that if we intend to walk with God, then it seems sensible to, take some time to get to know our companion. Wouldn't you agree? So if we envision Jesus as our walking companion, then should we not inquire about who he is and learn about his life? Find out what he did for us. He's our Lord, but as a companion, he's our brother. And that is a biblically correct way to look at things. So if you have a brother like a sibling, for example, or a sister, would you probably know about him or her? You would, wouldn't you? You'd know quite a bit about the brother or sister that you grew up with. So then, don't you think it's a sensible thing to do, to learn about Jesus if he's going to be your companion for the rest of your life? Learn everything you can and do, and as you do so, you will love this man with all your heart. You have all the information you need in the New Testament. So what's stopping you? I could say, the same about walking with God the Father. Learn about him from the Old Testament and just see that you're learning about God in a deeper and wider sense. These are God's lessons. They're not scheduled, you don't have one at 9 o'clock and another one at 10:15 and another one at 11 o'clock and so on like that. These are things that you have to take on board yourself. The children of our imaginary school, we're following a curriculum, aren't they? Learning, but we can ask questions, learn to interpret the words and the meanings and gradually see God's plan for us. We can learn to think for ourselves. We still need a teacher. We still need someone who can help us. And that's where your minister comes in. Another thing about these lessons is that we have to be protected. And that's another reason for choosing your pastor wisely. Is we need to be protected from false doctrines and heresies. So we've got to find teachers to keep us on the straight and narrow path. It's very easy to be sidetracked and even deceived. So, look, I hope that my use of a parallel today, I hope that that's given you some insight into the need for constant attention to our walk with God. I mean, there is a lot more to than what I've just been talking about today. Excuse me, but we can't afford to be lazy about our responsibilities. Because to do that would mean that we've left the door open to sin. And that would spoil our walk with God. You cannot walk alongside an unrepentant sinner. He will give you time, but ultimately it is we who must do the right thing. It's our responsibility to make sure that we are righteous in the sight of God. Right, so that's the end of our little sermon for today. I just want to mention that these videos in our Help series, Help Ministry, they're here. This one is on YouTube. It's useful in its own right, but for more detailed and more specific areas we can look at in more depth, then I want to encourage you to visit our Patreon site, our Patreon account. You subscribe to our Patreon account and you'll getting exclusive material. We'll be having question and answer sessions and various other goodies, if you like, along the way. But essentially, by signing up, you're going to be supporting this ministry, which allows us to continue and bring the Word of God to more and more people, I hope, and pray. So thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Please like and subscribe to the channel here on YouTube. I know it's annoying to hear that, but it needs to happen if we're going to grow in any way. So that's all. Thanks very much for joining and watching. Hope to see you again soon. See you soon. Bye.